Hello everyone and welcome to this special edition of Business Insights in Vietnam. As Vietnam continues to cement its position as a key player in Southeast Asia economy, we are seeing fascinating developments in multiple sectors. Today I'm joined with Vinh Ho, who has been doing business and living in Vietnam for more than 5 years to discuss these dynamics. This discussion will be valuable for foreign investors, it can be entrepreneurs or SME owners to understand about the current landscape either for market entry or sourcing diversification. So industry leaders can understand about the opportunities in Vietnam. So today we're exploring 3 critical trends of Vietnam landscape with supply chain diversification, foreign direct investment, and the rapidly evolving domestic consumer market. Hey Vin, I'm very happy to have you today to discuss about these dynamics and share insight about those developments. Hello mate, how are you doing today?
Hi, Guy. I'm good, thank you.
So let's begin with the first topic and how supply chain diversification is right now reshaping how companies are doing procurement and manufacturing overseas.
So I think that one of the biggest trends I'm noticing is that it seems like lots of companies since maybe 4 or 5 years ago are now moving from China into Vietnam, and I'm seeing a lot about that. So what are your thoughts? Is that something you've noticed too?
Yeah, definitely, Vin. So I think that China Plus One strategy is a buzzword that has been already out there for, as you say, 5 years around. And then it actually come risks from companies. So they used to be very relying on one supply chain. So most of the supply chain were Chinese based often. So they were working with one or a few suppliers in China. And then years after years, first those big groups started to diversify their procurement, sourcing, and manufacturing. And now we're seeing in 2025, it's also the SME. So even, for instance, companies who can do 10, 20 containers per year, they will be also looking at these diversifications just to mitigate the risk and also sometimes to find in neighboring countries such as Vietnam, India, Thailand, for example, good labor, and then that are able also to accept new entrants in some key industries. Maybe it could be interesting to list some of the industries, especially in Vietnam. What were your previous experience, Vin, as you used to be involved in the Vietnam manufacturing landscape earlier?
3 or 4 years ago, I was working for a Chinese manufacturer and exporter based in Shanghai, and they were moving more of their manufacturing in Vietnam. So that was the trend that was happening. And then a lot of their customers, because of the high tariffs that Trump imposed in 2018, now their customers were telling them that they needed to find another source. And so they were looking at India and they were looking at Vietnam, and that's where I was helping them with their home and garden products.
There are actually a lot of product categories that would be very suitable for Vietnam. For instance, indoor furniture, just because Vietnam can import wood from overseas, and then in Vietnam there is this craftsmanship, and for generation and generation they've been good into doing sculpting. Now, of course, most of the things has been replaced by CNC machine, but furniture is one of the sector. It's also important to mention that Vietnam has their own raw materials, so we can find acacia, rubber wood in Vietnam that can be local sources, so sourced locally and then also transformed to be exported. Then there is another product category that is linked to that. It's home decor, handicraft products, and then Vietnam is relying a lot on some artisan villages that are often outside of major cities, and big manufacturers are often having in-house people that will be doing part of the job, but then will be relying a lot on those artisans villages to outsource the work and to be able to also scale when they're having a big order. You have also all the textile and garments that is also one of the strengths of Vietnam, and I think this year Vietnam is becoming the second largest exporter of garments. So years after years, getting more and more attention for global markets. And then one of the last one can be, as you mentioned, all the tools, gardens, equipments, also patios, so all outdoor furniture can also be very suitable for Vietnam. Is there any other industries that you also heard that Vietnam is quite good at?
I think in the last few years, electronics and a little bit more higher end manufacturing. As we look for the future, I think is it NVIDIA and some more maybe high tech manufacturing I think Samsung has been there for years. And so Vietnam is has been known as a big player in like smartphones and things like that. So not only just the low end manufacturing that we covered, the kind of like artisanal crafts and home and garden and furniture and textiles and clothing that Vietnam has been known for, but then I think now there's been a surge in more medium to higher end manufacturing too.
That's very true. Apple has actually shifted a huge part of its production to Vietnam through suppliers like Foxconn that are well known. And so giants like this, you mentioned Samsung, there is also LG that are right now manufacturing all type of products in Vietnam. And then on the lower range, you still have some electronics suppliers in Vietnam that will be more what we call the PCB and PCBA. So basically, all the printed circuits and then all the assembling can be done in Vietnam, of course, benefiting from the lower labor cost. And then most of the components will still be imported. But then Vietnam more and more, and years after year, is getting seats into doing such product, and it's probably be the trend that will be continuing in the next year with after probably the semiconductors and then other high-tech manufacturing that may also come along to Vietnam.
Right.
So it's interesting, Vin, that we could touch about those relocation and diversification of the supply chain. What is coming along, for instance, the industrial parks and then also the infrastructure that has been built. For instance, Long Tan Airport is going to be a giant airport outside of Ho Chi Minh City. Also deep sea port that are in Vietnam that can help for the logistics and all the transportation. Was it also what you observed? You stay in Vietnam for more than 5 years.
Yeah, when I was there, it seemed like Vietnam is moving towards like more development and in its infrastructure in terms of roads, airports. Again, when I was there, I think they announced a new airport that was being constructed, miles away from the older or the present airport, as well as a long distance bus terminal. I think that was another big capital investment that they were working on. And then, of course, I didn't see it, but it was being built at my time there. There's the subway that was just opened, I believe, maybe a few months ago, maybe in January. So the Hanoi, when I was there, they had opened their subway station, light rail, and then now Ho Chi Minh City has their subway station. And so it seems like infrastructure in general is moving quickly, and it's, they're making lots of investments. Like you mentioned, the deep sea ports, Vietnam knows that they have to develop that area too now with all the trade going on. And then also the railway, it's been announced that they're going to try to modernize high speed rail between north and south. Of course, it's a big, multi decade project, but at least they're making the investment, at least they're looking at it and doing the research. Any other projects that you know of that are talked about or they're being implemented?
One other big name is Lego that has been setting up its biggest manufacturing plant in Vinung, so right outside of Ho Chi Minh City. So big players like that are setting up sometimes sub factories or sometimes even the major factories in Vietnam. Related to the industries, again, it will also be working by cluster. So in some industrial zone, you may only find furniture factories. If you go to VSIP, which is the Vietnam Singaporean Industrial Park, you also have all the high-tech factories. So in Vietnam, it worked like that. Of course, in some areas, everything will be split, but step by step, there will be also parks that are regional and that are specialized into some type of skills and products, which will also bring along with the HR, the training, the universities, and also some skilled labor that will be also able to take on project and then grow in terms of their experience and expertise. Vin, probably now we can move to the second topic, which is the FDI, so all the foreign direct investment in Vietnam. Over the last 10 years, probably there have been a lot of such companies that came to Vietnam to set up firstly manufacturing plants, but not only. We also see the growing IT sector in Vietnam with a lot of outsourcing companies, because just here companies are benefiting from a trained labor. Often those engineers can be graduated from major as math, IT, mechanics, etc. We should still be able to provide a very good, decent work, but at a lower range compared to other foreign markets. What have been that trend into following the FDI investments in some key sectors been?
Vietnam has been able to attract foreign direct investment for decades now. Especially, I think the top three are Taiwanese, South Koreans, and then Japanese are, I think, the biggest investors. And across the board, we've seen could be high tech parks, as you mentioned, electronics. Now we're looking at education, and then, of course, in the past was infrastructure, the subways I have mentioned. So lots of FDI has been moving into Vietnam for various reasons because I think people see the potential. Vietnam has been underdeveloped for many years now, and it's hasn't been moving up at the world stage. But now with manufacturing and with the demographics and the strategic location Vietnam has south of China and in the Southeast Asia, and so now we're seeing lots of things are coming together, and so I think that's just natural that now Vietnam has plenty of FDI and it continues to grow year by year.
Vietnam, we have to remember that 70% of the population is under 35 years old, which means that there is a huge workforce that is available. And then if we exclude the major cities, you have a lot of people that will be sitting around manufacturing hub. So of course, for a company, if you set up your company at the right place, you can immediately get a huge pool of talents at a way lower competitive rate that you would have in the West. The second important aspect is also related to politics, and because it's a one-party government, it's also bring stability for foreign companies to come here. And because of the legal framework, we can also, as a foreigner, set up a 100% foreign-owned company in many various sectors. Some sectors will be restricted and you will need to get a Vietnamese shareholder. But if you are setting up a consulting company or a manufacturing company in general sector, excluding some of them that are regulated, we can think about chemicals, or if we touch about petrol type of products, those sectors will be restricted from foreign owned, but all the other major sectors, as a foreigner, you can easily set up your company here. So I think for a foreign company looking to enter this Vietnamese market to set up a manufacturing plant, it also makes sense, and then the country is pushing toward that direction of attracting more manufacturers, and also very pro-export by signing a lot of free trade agreements or specific agreements with numerous countries. It does create this favorable ground and soil to let entrepreneurs come, set up their business and grow. As a wrap-up, Vietnam can be a good country to consider if you are looking to diversify your supply chain, just because you'll be relying on infrastructure that are going in the good direction. And then also to set up your factory, you also benefit from a stable political environment as well as favorable conditions to open your company. Now we can move to the last topic, which is more about the consumer trends. So here we will think about, let's say, a brand considering entering Asia, why they could consider Vietnam as a first country to start, to get some awareness on the Asian consumers. Why, according to you, Vietnam could be a good entry point to enter and then to grow in Asia?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is the low cost. Vietnam is still affordable these days, and the consumer segment demographics, they love foreign brands and they're open to different types of influences. And so it's like an untapped market. So there's a lot of potential there. And then entering Vietnam, again, just for like a rent for your office or doing business or transportation or hotel or food, just to operate is very, very affordable. So that might be a good way to get into Vietnam and then expand to other countries. Maybe Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, or other surrounding and growing markets. So that is a good reason to start with Vietnam. How about you? What do you think?
It's a good point, Vin. I think also just considering the middle class, right? The middle class is rising. And I think according to the statistic, it may reach 50% of the population by 2030, meaning that if we calculate 100 million people, it means that 50 million people may start to have a certain power to purchase goods. And then because that country is just growing super fast, If you target cities like Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, for instance, and Hanoi as the three main cities to enter, you find consumers that will be also very keen to explore new things. They will be very keen to explore new imported brands. If you are having a special idea of opening up a restaurant, a cafe, etc., there will be a lot of competition, but you also be facing consumers who will be keen to explore new things. So let's say about cosmetic, Vietnam is also importing a lot of such products from Korea, from Japan. It can also be a country to consider in that sense, that if you have a good idea or a good product, you can also try it on Vietnamese consumers and see if you manage to find an angle to sell and then to grow within the country.
Yeah, I agree. Vietnam has lots of things going for itself. As you mentioned, 100 million population and a growing consumer base. The demographics is working. It's quite a young country. And they want, like I had mentioned, they want the Western types of products, and they haven't really had access to a lot of types of things. So if you're a Western company and you want to sell into that market, I think that's a good idea.
So a brand name that we could list is, for instance, Uniqlo. Uniqlo is a Japanese store. They opened their first store in Vietnam a few years ago, and they plan to open 10 stores in Vietnam in the next upcoming years. So it also means that those foreign brands, they see in Vietnam a huge consumer base, and as soon as they have the right product, the right positioning, they know that they will be able to deliver and then to grow smoothly within the country. It doesn't mean that it's always easy to do that, right? Because if you don't have the right brand positioning and if you don't have the right message to touch those consumers, it can also be challenging. I heard stories of brands also struggling. They may have a very good idea, very good product or very good marketing, but it's also hard sometimes to penetrate the Vietnamese market. So we need to understand the nuances in Vietnam and then know how here those consumers are purchasing. For instance, here many people are connected, are online. Just because of the very young population in Vietnam, you need to use a lot of digital strategies to spread your brand awareness and to try to reach key potential buyers in Vietnam.
All right, so Guillaume, it looks like Vietnam has lots of potential these days and going forward in the future. I mean, we're seeing the supply chain moving to Vietnam. We're seeing more manufacturing, more investment, and infrastructure. And then Vietnam is a great gateway in terms of starting a business and then moving to other Southeast Asian countries. And a little bit of advice I would say is to visit Vietnam in the near future if you can. There are lots of business conferences going on, expos. I think that's probably the easiest way. Maybe just spend maybe 2 weeks in country exploring as a tourist and as a business person. I think you'll see a lot. Any advice there, Guillaume?
I think first people should come here as a tourist, right? They should just discover the country if they've never been here. And then after that, they should also plan another trip or plan the same trip alongside with the first one, but more for a business perspective. So maybe spend time in each of the key cities you would consider living, and then try to gather with the local community. You can have workshops, conferences, seminars. If you are into import-export, there is a lot of trade show as well. So you should really spend time, start to get a first sense about who are the main players in some key industries. And then from this, you will see if you can find any idea where you can add up your current experience, your current contact, your current strategies, and then see if you can match it with something in Vietnam. Probably start with a partnership. So start with someone who is either already in place, having a certain business, and try to plug to this person, try to joint venture somehow. And then after that, after a couple of years, you can try to find and then to have your own venture. But obviously you may go through a lot of pitfalls and then trial errors if you are doing it by yourself, rather than if you have any mentor or any partner that you could share the risk as well as the success.
Okay, Guillaume, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vin. It was a pleasure.
Been down and I'ma get it right. Then I'll sight like